Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of everyone here at the ITP Tech team, let me offer you all a very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Kelly, and I'm the editor here at CommsMEA. In a moment, I'll hand you over to our moderator for today, Patrick Donegan, founder and principal analyst at HardenStance, to begin today's discussion. But first, let me introduce our two panelists who will be joining us to discuss today's topic, why next generation connectivity demands cutting-edge security. I'm delighted to say that we're joined today by two excellent panelists. First, let me introduce Mr. Hussain Meeran, Vice President for Technology Governance at Etisalat Group, where he is in charge of overseeing the adoption of international standards at Etisalat's international operations. Hussain has been working at Etisalat for more than 25 years, during which time he has served in the IT department and the international technology department. He's responsible for information security strategy, policy and governance, measurement, and benchmarking. With over 148 million subscribers spread across the length and breadth of the Middle East and Africa region, Etisalat is one of the region's biggest telcos, and I can honestly think of no one in a better position to give us a unique insight into the security challenges operators are facing today. I'm equally delighted to introduce our second panelist, NetNumber's CRO, Matt Rosenberg. Matt is primarily responsible for end-to-end management and growth of all revenues into NetNumber. He brings deep knowledge of the telecom software industry, including complex solution sales expertise, building delivery and service teams, and driving organic and inorganic revenue for high growth companies. Prior to joining NetNumber, Matt was co-founder of and COO of vCinema, an early entrant into the video on demand industry. So finally, if you have any questions that come to mind during today's session, please send them to us via the chat function, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we possibly can. So now that we're all acquainted, let me pass you over to Patrick to begin today's discussion. Patrick, it's over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. A very brief word about HardenStance, who I am, who the company is. It is an industry analyst firm focused largely on the intersection between the telecom and cybersecurity sectors, hence why the good folks of ITP and NetNumber thought I would make an interesting moderator of this session this afternoon. So we're here today talking about telecom fraud and cybersecurity threats. Fraud measured and defined in terms of the immediate financial gain. Cybersecurity threats being defined in terms of immediate financial gain being just one of the possible motivations for those types of activities. Fraud's one of the oldest professions, shall we say. It predates by many, many centuries the telecom era. In the telecom era, we've become familiar with it through toll fraud going back many decades. In the mobile era, we've become familiar with it in the form of mobile roaming fraud, SIM card fraud, and multiple other types of fraud, including more sophisticated versions that we're going to make the subject of some of our conversation during the course of this webinar. It was barely a year into the 4G era that Mark Andreessen informed us that software was eating the world. And for the last decade or so, we've been living with the benefits of that, all the fantastic speed of innovation, but we're also paying the price and having to face the cost of that in the form of the decline in trust. So trust in networking and the internet is fundamentally broken. And one of the things we're going to be discussing today is how that has come to be and how we go about putting that right. We can't, as consumers today, automatically or inherently trust anything. We can't trust an email purporting to be from our bank. We can't trust a phone call purporting to be from our tax authorities. We can't inherently trust anything as consumers. Similarly, as telcos, we can't inherently trust the devices in our network, lest they reroute traffic in ways that we wouldn't want, lest they turn on other devices and take them out of service. We can't inherently trust our interconnection partners, lest they perpetrate fraud either on us or on our customers. We can't trust our supply chain partners, lest either their software or their processes make us vulnerable in some way. We can't even trust our employees, lest they do something either deliberately or accidentally that puts our organizations at risk. So at the start of the 5G era, trust has broken down. And what we're going to be looking at here is what are the building blocks of trust from a telco perspective? How can we understand those building blocks, and how can we implement them in a way that makes our customers and our businesses more successful and more robust? What we're doing with today's session is giving you some best-in-class experience and insights into helping you ensure that you can and do ensure that we have less threats in the coming era than we've had more recently. So with that, I think I'm going to move to some discussion points, which have been pre-discussed and pre-agreed with the various speakers that we have. And forgive me, I'm just going to get my my slides together here. So yes, to Matt and to Hussain, I wanted to look at the four domains that we're going to be talking about, the four areas of risk. So that's consumer security and consumer fraud, and then equally network security and network fraud. And Matt, if you would, I wonder, just give us a little bit of a flavor, a little bit of a starting point in terms of the criminal actors that are perpetrating all this stuff. How is it they're able to do what it is that they're doing? How is it that they're able to get away with it so often? And on the occasions when they do get caught, how is it that enforcement of fines is so challenging, so that we have a kind of circular loop to face as telcos and other folks on the white hat side of the equation?
Sure, Patrick. Thank you. Great question. So let's start with a couple of basic premise facts here. Hackers can hack text messages. They can hack mobile phones. They can hack locations. Oftentimes, they can hack systems. They're very deep systems that are behind certain firewalls. The challenge with all these, quote unquote hacks is that typically most people don't either know about them or they know about them when it's too late. And so these actors tend to be a whole range of people, whether they're youth, adolescents, beyond the reach of the law in some countries, whether they're geographically obfuscated due to particular encryption means, or they're just acting on behalf of somebody else unaware. If you look at what we see, we kind of define three types of actors. You have your black hat hackers, typically looking to do malicious damage to a network. You have your white hat hackers, typically looking to help organizations expose vulnerabilities and then close those gaps. Then you have gray hat hackers who maybe are out for a joyride and they want to go infiltrate a particular network but don't have a malicious intent. And either way, it's very hard to specifically pinpoint where they do it, when they do it, how they do it, how often they're doing it, because again, it's not usually real time, it's usually post fact. And so a lot of the hacks happen beyond borders. And so for someone in one particular country to try and punish or impugn other places, it's hard to extract those people from those countries or enforce local law authorities to do something about it. We do see occasions where people are caught and they are punished. We've seen jail times, we've seen a lot of monetary punishments, but again, it's becoming harder and harder given the fact that there's too many things going on that people aren't aware of until post fact.
Thanks, Matt. So that's a great start. So let's look now at issues to do with consumer security. So let's look in terms of the items that we have listed there: the call interception, the location tracking. And Hussain, let me ask you, you have a fantastic perspective across the region with multiple networks. In terms of those types of attacks, what over the last 12 months or so have given, what are the types of attacks that have given you the most cause for concern? And are there some concrete examples, perhaps not necessarily disclosing the countries, that you can share with us?
Okay, Patrick, as you had mentioned and Matt also had mentioned, and maybe I can add by saying that the more that we evolve with our technology, with our services, with our product and solution, the latest state of the art technology, the other guys also on the other side, as Matt has mentioned, they are there to monitor and see what they can leverage and what they can grab out of these kind of service and technology. Now, as a trend on the telecom industry, some had defined some certain kind of top threats, I would say, on the market. Like there are like data leakages, because people now obviously are very depending on their mobiles, and they use mobile apps to finish and finalize a lot of their services and their related personal or even business related kind of activities. So we noticed, like, I mean, worldwide, that there is like a threats towards the data leakages. People also, with the situation that's happening currently with the COVID-19 situation spreading out, and people are depending in different sectors, education, health, and others. People are depending on their internet connectivity, and they also need to save some time by going over their data plan. So they sometimes go on Wi-Fi, which some of these Wi-Fi are unsecured. So that kind of also top threats available in the industry. Network spoofing by using some fake access points are also one of the threats. Phishing attacks are also becoming very evolving on the mobile email, basically because people are using their emails on the mobile as real time. So people are very interested to see now and capture of this information. Spywares, broken cryptography, and improper session handling. These are common of top. Now, from our perspective and from Etisalat and within our footprints, because Etisalat serve on different footprint on the Africa, Asia, similar to the other also kind of other group companies. It has been observed, especially with the COVID-19, there is a COVID-19 themed phishing kind of attacks, such as like mal spam campaigns targeting, especially on in the Middle East. I know it might be also some other part of the world, but this has been noticed on the Middle East, trying to exploit some vulnerabilities on remote services such as VPN, because people are very depending on the VPNs to connect to either to their home, because being working from home, trying to connect to their offices. A lot of people are depending on the video conferencing solutions, and those hackers are targeting these kind of connection. So it's been noticed also through our footprint, that cyber criminals are creating thousands of new sites every day to carry out spam campaigns for phishing, spreading malwares to capture and to harm from these perspectives.
That's great insight. So in terms of I think everybody would recognize the pandemic of phishing emails and spam. Everybody recognizes this almost in their daily lives. But talk just for a very brief moment, if you would, in terms of network spoofing. Have you seen, how frequently do you see these across the region? Is this, once a month, once a week, once a day? What sort of frequency are you seeing network spoofing, bearing in mind, obviously, that many times you can't actually spot when it's occurred?
Well, I think it depends on the region respective, where are a lot of people trying to attempt to get such kind of capturing of these calls through the network. I know we notice on certain areas in our footprints it's heavy. It's even becoming if I can give like figures weekly, I would say that there's like more than 5, if we see that more reasonable, that people are trying to do the spoofing. Where on some of the other region, no, we had seen some other kind of attacks are becoming very like denial of service on the network side, which used to be like more appropriate, because they are some of it comes out of, by the way, some other causing or other reason, especially on the situation, some like a political kind of situation also on some of the regions, where they really use these kind of spoofing or denial of service kind of attacks.
Right. Matt, are there aspects of what Hussain said that sound somewhat unique to you, or does it sound entirely like everything you see everywhere else in the world with your other customers?
Yeah, great question. And I think Hussain has mentioned some excellent points there. From our perspective, we have customers all around the globe. We have over 300 customers in every particular region. And what we're seeing is very akin to what Hussain has mentioned, happening everywhere. I don't think there is one particular region that is not affected or is affected. But what very importantly, as Hussain was mentioning, there are regional differences. And so while there might be a typical type of attack, whether that's DDoS or other things, there's certain regional variances that cause it to be a little bit different. And that could be many reasons. It could be that geography has high value targets. It could be because there's a particular set of large skill sets in a region that they can get access to learning how to do these things very quickly, or et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, the whole concept of Wi-Fi versus network is very interesting, because then you have off-net versus on-net security problems. While they mimic similar attributes, they are different in terms of how you can secure those gaps. So yeah, we do see it globally, and we do see global with regional variances.
So, but in both your cases, let me maybe turn to Hussain first. Your first reference, many of the references you both made were in relation to consumer impacting security incidents. Without naming countries, can I maybe ask you to give a couple of examples, either in the region or elsewhere, in which attacks have been visited upon telcos in the region or elsewhere over the course of the last 12 months, and describe the specific impact of the attack that has occurred? Is it possible to do that, Hussain, without naming countries or operators?
Well, maybe not very. If I remember one with a big impact, it was one within the region. It was a mixture of like a malicious malware with leakage of information, and that was very drastic by the way that it had caused that operation to be out of service for a couple of days, actually.
Wow.
And the intent was more toward like political and and basically like getting an interest of these kind of data for the not competition. I would say it's more that to destroy the image and the business of that company. So that was kind of one of the incidents happening within the region here.
Right. So Matt, that type of attack that Hussain described, a politically motivated attack, is that a black hat attack in your mind, or a grey hat attack?
Oh, clearly a black hat attack for sure.
Right.
Right. And you have to think of attacks as in the black hat arena as a couple different goals. One goal, which is kind of like the gold mine goal, is get data, right? They want to infiltrate a system to bring data out, whether to expose it or use it for monetary means. Another type of situation might be to stop something. As Hussain was saying, politically, they may want to stop some type of campaign or show that the region is not very safe, and so that there's knock-on effects later on. It clearly has a lot of different angles here. Right.
Okay. Let's go to the next question then, and we want to talk a little bit specifically, drill down into fraud perpetrated against consumers. In terms of things like robocalls, Wangiri, CLI spoofing, Hussain, what have you been seeing across the region over the last year or so that's caused you concern?
Well, these kind of attacks, I wouldn't say that they don't exist within our region, but they are not as much as they are exist like in other region like US and other. But we have seen some kind of these either robocalls or Wangiri kind of attacks. But the interest behind it is just to capture some benefits, mainly financially, from the ultimate victims, where these calls are meant to either kind of promote for new services or winning a prize, or some of it also related to some like bank account information kind of things, and where the victim would be, this is basically, I think this is more kind of coordinated kind of effort where they had, it's been repeating too many, and the target people are people sometimes are, in some cases, the people who are who may not be fully aware of these kind of attacks. And then some attempts being very successful, and some being after the awareness has been very highly raised on the region here, it has been now reduced much, because the operators and the government has really took some stand at this point, advertising about these kind of attacks, and also specifying such like numbers, organizations to report these kind of incidents, where it's been reduced now. But I'm sure on some other region, these kind of attacks are very much exist still.
Right, Matt, you're going to have experience of this all over the world, particularly in the US. I mean, the robocalls are a daily nightmare for a lot of people. What's the reason that the Middle East hasn't suffered so much, do you think, up until now? And have they just gotten lucky, or are there more kind of structural reasons why that hasn't happened?
Well, that's a good question. And for sure, we see certain regions more susceptible than others. A lot of times it comes down to the infrastructure itself. I think the Middle East has been very fortunate to have very secure networks for a long period of time, whereas other countries like maybe someplace in Europe or US have had older networks in place a little bit longer. So not paying attention to those sort of vulnerabilities kind of gets underpinned. Irrespective of whether the age of the network is there or not, there are certainly gaps and vulnerabilities that get exposed. And so oftentimes, again, certain attackers want to make a statement in some particular region. That has historically been Europe, historically been the US. We're now starting to see that in the Middle East. And we're seeing that against consumers in the Middle East a bit more than organizations. It doesn't mean to say that's one versus the other is driving in a particular trend, but we certainly see consumers being attacked a bit more in the Middle East than we do organizations.
Right, that's interesting. Okay, so let's maybe talk now about fraud carried out against the network, Hussain. Beginning with your properties, what are the number one threats to from a network fraud perspective to the Etisalat companies? Is it roaming fraud? Is it protocol abuse? Is it others? Signaling overload? What are the ones that cause you the biggest concern? And again, what do you have to be most vigilant about with respect to protecting against them?
I would say, again, as I said, it's also more of a regional kind of perspective. We see that SS7 attacks are very high on some of our footprints, while in some other areas we've noticed as I said, the COVID-19 team kind of attack, specifically on the extortion of information theft for brand damages and business disruption kind of attacks. Also, denial of service on some of the operation, they have really reported very high denial of service kind of attacks. I think during 1 month, it's been reported more than 1,500 kind of denial of service on one of the operators that we manage. And as I said, so these are the top kind of attacks that occurs very recently.
Well, there's some fascinating data points there. Let me pick up on one or two of them, if I may. So first of all, you said that you're seeing quite a few SS7 attacks in the region, which is kind of interesting because a lot of people don't fully understand that those attacks are easier to carry out nowadays if you're not properly protected. Let me ask you, has the motivation for those types of attacks been primarily one of financial fraud, as we've seen in the US, as in the UK and in Germany, where they've used SS7 vulnerabilities to carry out an attack on someone's bank account? Or is it more sort of espionage-related motivations that you've seen, or another?
Well, it is between these two, actually, Patrick, because, on some region, it is more of espionage due to the situation of these areas. Some of it is really for financial benefits, where they need to either to use these calls for their benefits, or, for example, to do manipulation of the price rating across the calls within these countries. So it's between these kind of things.
And let me ask you to clarify one other data point, which I thought was very interesting. Did you say that you had a telco in your family of telcos that suffered 1,500 DDoS attacks in 1 month? Did you say that?
Exactly.
Wow.
reported through their devices being detected these heavy kind of attacks, or especially denial of service attacks.
You managed to prevent any impact from any of them?
Yeah, I think all been detected and all been reported, and some been mitigated as well or mostly been mitigated, I would say. So not sure. I haven't gone deep to see what was the interest behind but I think mostly is like more of that business brand damages or business disruption kind of attack.
Well, it's too bad this is a virtual event, because I think that deserves a round of applause. But the fact that you managed to do that level of protection, but unfortunately, you're not going to hear it. You can have one from me. How's that? There you go. Matt, let me ask you: again, similar question? Similarities and differences between what Hussain's reporting in his region and what you're seeing elsewhere?
Of course, they're very, very, very close in similarity. We see these often, denial of service, of course, is the biggest threat, as Hussain had mentioned. And you saw the numbers that Hussain mentioned there. It certainly is something that, without access to real-time data, and you'll hear me say this a couple times throughout the webinar later on, it's very hard to affect something quickly. And so typically there's a post-reaction event. But let's also remember one thing, that protecting the network is not new to carriers. We've had multiple layers of protection for the last 15, 20 years, but they've evolved as technology's evolved, as data has evolved, etc. So carriers used to implement things like whitelist, blacklist, graylist. Carriers implemented EIR to protect the theft of particular mobile devices. As data has expanded dramatically, as malicious intent has expanded dramatically, as access to internet has expanded dramatically, and the move to software, different solutions are required. So regions like the Middle East are looking at some very complex solutions to handle complex problems. So stir shaken, signaling firewalls, access to real-time data from a global community, seismic over in Europe. All of these items are now starting to evolve as the networks themselves are evolving against the sophistication of the threats.
So, Matt, you mentioned stir shaken, and obviously that's in the process. It's been mandated by the use of that protocol to protect against robocalls has been mandated by the FCC in the US. But Hussain's told us that thus far, robocalls haven't been a big issue in the Middle East. Is that to say that stir shaken's not necessarily all that relevant a protocol to the Middle East, would you say?
I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's true for any region. Reason being is it may not particularly be relevant within that region, but all carriers have to interconnect traffic.
Right.
And there's a certain set of carriers that will want to interconnect traffic originating outside of the U.S. back into the U.S. that will require some type of token authentication and handshaking. On those particular cases, stir shaken may be something that carriers want to implement in order to create that trusted connection or interconnection, I should say, between originating and destination. We're seeing a couple of carriers in Europe right now who've implemented some of our stir shaken solutions in Europe with that very specific model in mind, to better interconnect traffic that require a token authentication.
Right. Does that case for protecting the interconnect in that way resonate with you, Hussain?
Definitely, yes. Since, as you mentioned, the shaken protocol that based on the like digital certificate communication, so that really very much required, because as also we've been mentioning that the evolvement of technology and a lot of either type of these attacks we mentioned about the CLI spoofing, or even the normal mobile user who are like using some application that does the communication with other entities, server whatsoever, that require these kind of session or token to be always certifying these communication between the client and the service, and keeping also the session open and revalidating the session very frequently. It is very much required. Otherwise, this is what some poor development happen on some of these applications that really are misses or doesn't have these kind of good certification kind of verification, where these kind of attacks are becoming very so although yes, these kind of attacks, the robocalls, not very much, but I think applying such kind of protocol within the region will be very, very beneficial, and it will help really from future kind of attacks increasing.
That's very, very interesting. And see, I've got to say that's not a discussion I was expecting today. It wasn't a response that I was expecting to hear, but it makes a great deal of sense for the reasons you both outlined. Okay, so let's move then to the next discussion point. We want to talk a little bit about standards in telecom security. To what extent are operators, there are 3GPP and GSMA, they're brilliant at producing specifications. They produce them by the yard, massive amounts of them, but telcos are selective sometimes as to which ones they actually deploy, and sometimes for good reasons, because there are budgetary constraints. Let me ask you to begin, Hussain, in terms of the prescriptions that are available for security and fraud protection from 3GPP and from GSMA, what is the level of implementation of those? I mean, there's some fundamental basic ones that are mandatory, and there are some that are optional. Where is your group of telcos in terms of implementing some of those?
I would say in our either our footprints or within the region as well, in the Middle East, we see that 3GPP and GSMA are very mostly commonly and famous standard on the MENA region by providing technical specification and technical report. So 3GPP provides definitely standards organizations which develop protocol of mobile telecom, and 3GPP define these several specifications on fraud and security, which are well recognized. So I would say most of the operators here on the Middle East really depends on these kind of specifications. Similarly, the GSMA as well. I mean, we have a very active participant of the GSMA. We have actually a good representation at the GSMA from some people being at the board level and at the working group level. I've been participating in some of these working groups with the GSMA and different kind of schemes. I would maybe give an example here with one scheme regarding the fraud and security group kind of thing, by developing the NESIS scheme, which is basically the network equipment scheme, where jointly it was defined by GSMA and 3GPP to provide industry-wide security assurance framework against the telecom network equipment from different vendors. So this was a very kind of active participation from us. So the level of really aligning with these standards and protocol from the GSMA and 3GPP are very common with the telecom industry here and the MENA region.
Your comments with respect to NESAS is very, very interesting, because as you mentioned, that's the sort of means of assuring the security of the products that your telecom infrastructure vendors like NetNumber provide to you. So let me ask you, when do you anticipate the sort of bringing the NESAS quality assurance process into your procurement? So, for example, when NetNumber ships stuff to you in, 6, 12, 18 months' time, will that start to have to go through the NESAS framework, and in what sort of time frame?
Okay. Firstly, let me also give like a brief. Like NESAS was the framework has already been developed. Version 1.0 is already available. It is on the version 1.1 to be finalized and approved soon. So we were working together. I was working specifically with the procurement team and the legal team to start adding these guidelines or process at all procurement level across all our footprint, to ensure that is it's like a mandate kind of a condition for all of our procurement across all our footprints, to ensure aligning with the NESAS scheme across all our footprints. So that was the aim. So I hope within the next 1 year we would see the NESAS becoming like a mandate kind of a scheme to be utilized with the procurement at our group.
That is really interesting, Matt. What do you make of that? You as a security professional, you must welcome that, right? Even though it doesn't solve the problems that you solve, it's still another layer of security that you must welcome, right?
Sure, and there's a lot of actually a lot of stuff to say here about what Hussain has mentioned here. So, trying to be brief here, I think the first point is that the 3GPP and GSMA have done a wonderful job at exposing, educating, and assisting. We, like Hussain, take part in multiple working groups. NetNumber per se on the GSMA takes part in the FSAG, the Fraud Security Working Group, where we chair several bodies for the SS7 and diameter firewalls. That's helped us provide our expertise back into the community so we can share learning and help carriers protect certain areas of interest. The bodies that Hussain has mentioned and some of the working groups are vital in order to continue to protect, but we also have a slight evolution happening. In our particular business, we pretty much stopped selling hardware. We're pretty much now focused on a software vendor. So a lot of the architectural protections, while are very vital and they should be mandated across the globe, as Hussain was mentioned on the hardware side, I think software has to then follow suit. And that's where we particularly see very high interest in ensuring standards, not just on the hardware side, but also on the software architecture side.
Right. And I'd like to just offer an opinion here, which I think others may recognize. I think maybe as an industry, we tend to focus a little too much on the standards, on the prescriptions, because we kind of set ourselves, we satisfy ourselves that these tablets of stone have been handed down and we feel great about those tablets of stone. But actually, where the rubber meets the road, to use an American expression, is in how we actually operationalize those solutions, right? And that's where sometimes we've fallen down a bit in terms of the taking of those security capabilities and not necessarily either implementing them at all or maybe implementing them in a suboptimal way. Would you recognize that we need, as an industry, maybe a little more focus on the operational side of things and not just the tick box aspect of standards? Hussain?
Okay. I tend to agree to that, Patrick. Definitely the standard development organization will critically define the security standards and areas where need for standard has been identified for as their scope. But definitely every organization has its own security policies, and especially the defense sector, where security is their bread and butter, and really they need to really give it a big attention. So the number and level of security requirement is worked out against the demand for the situation, depending on the operational, as you said, scenarios. So a balance between security and the other system performance and the business requirement as well need to be kept through risk management kind of platform, and that definitely the security, operational security part need to be given a bigger kind of a stake.
Matt, I mean that's why that operational aspect is where you guys cannot just offer product and solutions, but consulting support as well, right?
Definitely.
Indeed. And what we see often is a lot of well-intentioned security guidance and protocols, etc. But really what it comes down to, and I think Hussain had alluded to this, it comes down to what you do in your own home. You have to actually enforce the operational security mechanisms and methodologies. Some of the areas that we've been involved in recently are just that. For example, we'll do unannounced security tests within an operational organization to see how that affects the signaling network on behalf of the carrier who we've been asked to provide this consulting service. And really it's designed to do two things. One, test the operational security of the actual network, but two, the processes and procedures around that, where operational teams and NOCs have to go and implement those procedures very strict, very rigid, very disciplined manner.
Very good indeed. Okay, great stuff. Let's move on to now take the conversation to the next logical place, which is that of collaboration between telcos and governments. Let's look at the first instance in terms of how effectively are governments in the region, Hussain, collaborating with telcos. And by that, I mean, governments collaborating with one another, collaborating with telcos, and then telcos collaborating with one another as well in terms of aspects of threat intelligence or whatever, to really help everybody be secure as an ecosystem. Where are we with that today?
Well, telecom operator in the region, through their regular body, through the regulatory authority company within the region here, are cooperating with the government by monitoring, tracking, and adopting the latest kind of technologies and services of the communication to serve the government's kind of needs, especially against some threats and security kind of risks. There are various forums and working groups where local telcos are participating along with the government agencies, basically, and there are regular kind of coordination with each other between the government and the telcos through the regulator body, actually. So we see good efforts spent between both to ensure a good collaboration, serving the I would say more toward the national kind of security and the ensuring the response to these kinds of threats in a very fast manner.
Right. What about lessons from the rest of the world that could be applicable to the Middle East, Matt? What have you seen in terms of best practice elsewhere that could perhaps be imported into Hussain's region?
Yeah, sure. So I think Hussain said it very well. I think every region is working with their local authorities and the regulatory bodies to ensure education, distribution, and a common approach to things. I think one of the challenges, however, in deploying these solutions, every region is different. And so every regulatory authority is different. And as a vendor of solutions, you therefore have a lot of challenge to make sure that your product can be configurable to handle variations and dependencies. And I think there is a inherent set of dialogue happening within every country, just due to the fact that there's national infrastructure and that becomes critical, and communications have to become critical. We as a society have relied on making sure we have real-time access to communicate. And so I think, given the fact that the last 5 or 6 years, we've exposed a number of issues that have happened where networks have gone down due to attacks, it's not unknown to any agency or any regulatory authority across the globe that they have to work with the carriers better. They have to educate the carriers, and the carriers have to educate the regulatory authority as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to make a point here that sometimes, or make a case that sometimes sounds a little unusual. And the point I'm going to make here is that in my mind, telcos, there are actually areas for collaborating with government that telcos don't always take advantage of. And the reason people find that odd sometimes, it's, well, hang on a minute, from a security perspective, whatever the government says as a telco in that country, it goes. So you kind of get told what to do in any country, and that's how things go. But the point I'd like to make here is that very often the telco security teams want to achieve a particular security objective. They want to, and they need a budget to achieve that particular security objective. And they go to their management or they go to the board, and the management's not really convinced. The board's not really convinced. And what I've seen a few times is that those telco security teams that can go to their national cybersecurity agency and say, look, I'm making the case for this investment, but I can't persuade my management to buy into this case. Will you accompany me to meetings and make the case for me as well? That's actually been quite successful on a few occasions. So, Hussain, does what I say resonate with you? Do you recognize that actually sometimes, rather than just waiting for government to tell you what to do, sometimes you can actually go to government and bring them as a partner to help you make your case? Does that ring true in your region?
So, unfortunately, if what I'll mention is true or not, but I think this is the way that I feel it's true. People feel of security when incident happens, when the impact happens, when the situation goes worse, basically. Yep. So definitely the security teams need to be, first of all, within the organization has to be really given a big role. And the second thing is really they need really to give the impact in all aspects, financial, image, perspective, business side, and try to really address this at a higher level within the organization, up to the board director kind of a level, and really to set a clear security strategy and roadmap for their. I have seen some experiences, by the way, within the region here, that some of the CSOs that really they had addressed it in a very challenging way for their management and for the director, to ensure that they can, with very kind of presentable figures, that this is what they are aiming. To extent, I could see some of the entities, even it's the governmental, and it's very surprising here, because normally the governmental sector used to be not very much bothered about the security kind of concern, but the way that is happening around now, with some sectors, maybe not the telco, if I correctly mentioned this, there are mandated by the top level of the government itself that there should be at least a CISO level with the organization of security within each entity, and that entity has to be filled. So the positions across all the security organizations has to be filled within a year, and they need to monitor the progress of that security organization within that entity, and to see what are the impacts. So they really address what went wrong if they did not have such kind of arrangement within the organization. So I could see this happening.
I think maybe something worth adding there is that another dimension there is that very often the security team doesn't have the necessary skill set in translating a technical threat and a technical requirement into a business case for management and the board, and sometimes they need help with that. Would you recognize that?
Yeah, that's common for technology people, by the way. I mean, the technical people are really, they don't know how to bring things on a dollar value kind of a presentation. They don't know how, not to know, because they are more focused toward the technology itself, the intelligence part of the technology, from automation, AI kind of perspective, and try to be more of an innovative, creative. But then when it comes to the really reflecting this to the business kind of a perspective, sometimes they might lack kind of these skills.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, my apologies. Come in, please.
No, it's good. Everything Hussain said is absolutely true, and it's hard for me to add much more details on that. But I will say two things on that level. I think first, we certainly see vendors taking a role in helping some of these security groups provide business cases back up to the government, et cetera. And then, to be fair, and then I'm sure Hussain will nod his head in agreement here, carriers have so much to focus on. There is new technology, there's cloud native, there's 5G, there is security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you find the appropriate budgets, and when do you spend those budgets? Typically are post-event. And sometimes some things like security takes a back seat to consumer-driven requirements like 5G handsets or better connectivity when roaming, because there's a lot of monetary value associated to that.
So we've had a couple of interesting questions from the audience, one of which is, what are the primary threat actors that you're seeing in the region? I guess this is aimed at Hussain. Are they nation-state actors? Are they well-known criminal groups? There are many high-profile APT groups. Are you seeing particular ones that are active in the region, or is it a little bit of everything?
That's to me, we had noticed, like on the past, since I was mentioning also during the discussion, that there was something related to the political situation around the region. There was some kind of threats and attacks was happening, and some has been noticed also within some of our footprints. It was kind of espionage kind of attack, or denial of service kind of attack. I mentioned a couple of them was happening very heavily. So this was definitely, there was some also the incident that I had mentioned. It was mainly from I would say, like, some of it was handled by an internal, from the internal of the organization, and the interest was to do the damage of the data and leakage of these data. So these are the common things that we've seen from these top threats that's been happening on the last, I would say, like 2 to 3 years.
I see, right, okay. A question here relating to, so somebody has said that, interesting to note the amount of SS7 attacks in the region, but what about from a diameter perspective? Matt, what are you seeing in terms of attacks on diameter today? And then I'll maybe ask Hussain to come in specifically with respect to the Middle East.
Sure, great question. Let me address that by first just laying the foundation of understanding SS7. The SS7 network was built many years ago as a trusted peer network. And therefore, once you were in the network, it was very easy to connect. And if you were quote unquote trusted, you could pretty much navigate across the entire global community. Diameter took a racial stance in terms of trusting. And those trusts come in different protocol formats like AVPs, et cetera. And so we see very similar activities happening on the Diameter network, like we did in SS7, with a different variant on the protocol. So having access to getting into the network and understanding being a quote trusted player once you're in, very hard to stop that.
And Hussain, have you seen attacks on Diameter as well, or is it primarily SS7?
No, primarily from the SS7, where one thing that is good as a setup among the region here that people go definitely with the, as Matt was mentioning, that the technology and the network setup are very modernized, and they ensure that they set up all kinds of the security parameters and implementing also the SS7 firewalls with all the filtering perspective to ensure that detecting all these kind of attacks. But as answer to the question, it is more SS7 kind of attacks more than the Diameter.
Very good. Well, that concludes the questions we have. Chris, I'll leave you to wrap up.
Perfect. Yep. I think all it leaves for me is just to say thank you very much again, Matt, for your time and for making the time from the US, and Hussain for joining us as well. It's been a really fascinating discussion. So thank you very much to everyone.